I mean, Liz Tiller had a little bit of a freak out backstage. Everything's fine. It's such a special day here, being surrounded by so many incredible women like yourself. And for us to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes with you guys talking about environmental justice, how it pertains to women in particular, I just want to start off with a question that I know I have, and I assume many other people do, which is climate change as a term has become so charged. It's science that is so attacked. Do you think that now, when we talk about climate change, people even really know what that means anymore? And what does it really mean? And not to swear in front of you, Dan, but why should everybody give a shit? Because we need to. So can you kind of bring us into your world?
I love that framing. I think I've stopped talking about whether the science is correct or not, because the science is correct, and we are at the point where we need to just be thinking about solutions, and there's so many solutions available to us. We just need to scale them much, much, much more quickly. And so I'm really excited to think about just working with the majority of Americans who understand climate change is real and are worried about what the future will look like if we don't do anything, working with the majority of our country to get things moving in the right direction. I think, especially for 40, the vast majority understand what's happening in the science and are just like tens of thousands of young people marching in the street with a climate strike and Fridays for Future. And it's just amazing to see the energy that's out there right now, especially with the Green New Deal like really hitting the forefront. So now you have Republicans realizing that they need to come up with an alternative that's not just, we don't like that. So the conversation in the last few months alone has just totally shifted as far as I think what's politically possible and what's socially expected. So I'm actually more hopeful now than I have been in a while.
I'm so relieved to hear you say that.
There's a lot of like buts.
There's a lot of buts, but it has felt a bit like doomsday to me. Yeah. And even this week, reporting coming out saying that we have the data to prove that nearly every coal plant in the United States is contaminating the groundwater around it. I sort of went, duh. How are we questioning this stuff? But people like to deny until the numbers are on the table. So I'm glad
the numbers have been on the table. I think that's what people don't understand. There was actually a woman over 100 years ago who sort of started climate science because she knew what was happening. And I'm embarrassed I forgot her name now, but no one in this room is surprised that a woman pioneered that field as well.
I mean, Rachel Carson wrote
Silent Spring in one of my absolute heroes. Yeah, helping people understand that we just weren't going to hear bird songs anymore if we kept spraying pesticides everywhere. And we're still, modern industrial agriculture is one of the things we absolutely need to change, not just for our food system and the environment and biodiversity, but also for climate change, because it's so dependent on fossil fuels.
Yes.
And that is, my mother's a farmer, so I'm just obsessed with regenerative farming and like the ways that we could be feeding ourselves.
I find all of that to be really interesting, whether we're talking about agriculture, the impact of fashion, the impact of the fossil fuel industry. Who would you say actually gets impacted by climate change the most? And how does climate change affect men versus women, if that's different? Do we have it worse when it comes to all of this stuff?
Climate change tends to impact the hardest the people who are already the most impacted. So as a marine biologist by training, I think a lot about coastal communities, and it's the poor communities and communities of color along the coast who are getting slammed by the storms that are stronger, by sea level rise, by pollution, by plastics, by all the stuff that's running down the rivers to the sea. And so it really is a social justice issue. When we think about climate change, climate justice is a term that's starting to be more commonly used. And then women actually bear a really great brunt of it too. When you think about the role that women play in providing food for their families in a lot of countries. They're the small farmers, they're the ones getting the water, there's all these things, and as the climate is shifting and these things are less reliable, it puts a lot more burden on women. But the good news is women are also this like incredible part of the solution. where if we educate girls, it just changes the way that families are planned, and leads to a whole different social dynamic that actually reduces carbon footprint. Educating girls is actually one of the top 10 solutions to climate change because of how it shifts family planning. And making sure that women can own property as farmers is another one of the top solutions to climate change, because women farm differently. They farm better, honestly. They farm in a way that shares information about what to grow and when, that sequesters more carbon and provides more food for communities. So there's a balance there, right? Like, women are the ones getting most impacted, and women are also the solution.
I love that.
Yeah.
That sort of. So Diane's question is how scientists are dealing with big corporations like Monsanto, which we all know are big, big polluters.
Yeah, so Monsanto created a lot of the worst chemicals, pesticides, the genetically modified foods, and they've lobbied to make sure that we don't even know about that because these things can't be labeled. And so how I personally deal with that is the organic labels still mean something. So even though you may wonder why it's worth the price, there are no pesticides in that. There's nothing genetically modified in organic foods. That actually is a way to circumvent supporting that industry. So, and I whatever extra money I have, I put into my family farm. My mother is a regenerative farmer. We have this amazing place upstate and a greenhouse and a permaculture garden, and trying to figure out, like, how do we create the model for the alternative.
But what I mean is, how do you make them feel guilty?
I think you'd probably be better than that.
That's why I'm asking.
Absolutely. I mean, I think calling out what we don't want to see.
I mean, they go and do it in Africa. They, everywhere.
It's vital. Yeah.
So do they know about it?
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of hedging their bets. Bayer actually just bought Monsanto. And so now there's an even larger company in that merger, they kind of did a risk analysis to understand how much liability they have in pending lawsuits from people who are getting cancer because of their chemicals. So another thing that we can do is support these people who are in these lawsuits and the nonprofits that are helping to sue Monsanto and Bayer and expose all of the terrible things they're doing. And write to the Environmental Protection Agency when there's a public comment period about these different chemicals. A lot of this stuff is still terribly underregulated.
And I think, to your point, as we see more and more educated on all of this, we know that thanks to our phones and the internet and social media, each of us is now a politician in our own right if we choose to be. And so if everyone in this room, as we talk about calls to action, as we did in the last panel, if everyone in this room chose to become publicly vocal about Monsanto, about big polluter chemicals, about what we want to see different in our food systems and in the food that becomes available to us, that's how we sway opinion. Because it's when we're quiet that they're able to get away with these things. And as we start to talk about how all of these systems is inextricably linked, women and science and the environment and education, it really is on us, because we may not be hindered by the environment the way a schoolgirl in Ethiopia is, who has to drop out of school because she has to walk 6 miles to and from the place where she gets water for her family. But each of us is being impacted somehow, and I do believe it becomes a responsibility for those of us who aren't stuck walking for water to make sure we're advocating for the women who are.
I'd love to hear from you. What have you found most effective as someone who uses her platform and her voice to talk about these issues? What resonates with people? What is breaking through?
I think data is really helpful because people hear.
Obviously, I'm excited about
yes,
part of your answer.
I love data. People really do, whether they realize it or not, get so impacted by whatever record is playing around them. So someone in a community who's being told that XYZ is okay every day advocates for that in some way. So when you can offer people data that helps to disprove a lie that they've been told by the people making money off of all of us feeding the system that accepts the lie, that is really helpful. And I think you also have to make sure it's not so much data that it feels overwhelming. Hit people with what's really surprising, undeniable, and remind them of how it impacts them. Remind them of how an entire community has been poisoned and has cancer because someone cared more about making money than your father living to meet his grandchildren. That's horrific. That's wrong whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, whatever. These are moral issues that we're talking about, and to your point, there are better ways to do this, but big companies don't want to invest in what's better because it means they're going to mark a potential loss in their profits next quarter. And I gotta be frank, I don't give a shit about your shareholders. I care about how you and me and everyone in this room and our families and our communities are going to be impacted. And it really becomes about forcing change rather than prioritizing profit. And the people making the profit aren't going to do that. It has to be about all of us demanding it. And then they get scared because we outnumber them. And so I really do think that it's about education and about the humanization of the data. Because if it's just data, people don't feel affected by it so much if it's not immediately affecting them. But if you put a face and a name on it, if you remind people that this may not be you, but it's her, that feels really, I think, and I see with my audience that I engage with a lot on these issues, that's most impactful.
As a scientist, I certainly could use some help on the storytelling piece. I think one of the things I think about a lot, especially in this neighborhood, is thinking about, we're right near the coast. And the Hudson, we don't think about New York being a coastal city, but it's an archipelago. It's like 24 islands. And the Hudson is actually salty as far north as Poughkeepsie sometimes. So there are seahorses living under piers in the Hudson River. There are whales in New York Harbor. We need to protect our urban ecosystems as well. And so what I think about a lot that scares me the most right now is sea level rise. That's the thing we're not talking about. That's the thing we're not dealing with. It's going to be a meter or two by the end of this century. And it's not all going to happen at the end like it's happening now. And you think about a meter more of water and then there's a storm. Just imagine, right? So I think we really need help thinking about how did our infrastructure change? How does our land use change? How is New York City going to need to look in 10 or 20 years? I mean, we need our brilliant architects and designers to help us think through this problem.
Yeah, when the first floor of every building in the city is underwater.
Yeah.
What does that mean for us? Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions that are a little bit less depressing, just because I'm also so curious. And as you said, there is hope here. How did you fall in love with the ocean? I mean, you're a marine biologist.
Yeah.
It's the coolest title, I think.
I'm just like the kid that never gave up on their dream.
Okay.
So I grew up in Brooklyn, and my dad was Jamaican, and when I was 5, we went on a family trip to the Caribbean. I learned to snorkel, and I held a sea urchin in my hand with a touch tank, the Florida Keys Aquarium, and I felt its 2/3 of weird tube feet on the bottom. That's how they walk, and I was just enraptured by this alien in my hand, and went on a glass bottom boat and saw a coral reef for the first time. I was just like, this is now my job. What is that called? And as you're a kid, everyone's constantly asking you, what are you going to be when you grow up? So I just kept saying it, but I didn't really do anything about it.
So you were on The Secret before that was a book, is what you're saying.
I don't even know what that means.
It's there's a bunch of, it's all the theories of sort of law of attraction. If you speak it,
yes,
you can.
I definitely spoke it into being.
I love that.
And when I was about to go to law school, I was like, you know what sounds more fun than law school? Doing a PhD in marine biology. And I was about to walk into LSAT, and I was like, science instead! So I learned to scuba dive and ended up actually my PhD was in the Caribbean studying how to sustainably manage fishing on coral reefs and redesigning fishing gear and interviewing fishermen. And so I basically had a PhD in drinking beer with fishermen and listening to their stories.
If you ever need an assistant to do your social media,
I feel like this is a really good partnership waiting to happen.
You've just done something for both of us. So to end, I can't believe we've run out of time. Just as you talk about all of the time you spent in these communities with fishermen and in communities that sustain themselves off of coral reefs and all of it. What would you say is the most frightening thing that you've encountered? And then what's the most hopeful? What's the thing that keeps you going back?
I think the most frightening thing is actually how fast nature is changing and how many people don't see it because they're so out of touch. So it's actually really amazing to hear Diane bring nature into the conversation last night over dinner and remind us all that we're part of the planet, we rely on the planet. And in a city, it's really hard to do to remember that. So that's the thing that's scary, is that we've lost the awareness of what's changing. You can't notice that the birds aren't singing anymore. We have a silent spring if you don't remember what it used to sound like. But the thing that gives me the most hope is that the people who are closest to the problem, the people who are fishermen, the people who are farmers, they get it. And there's a way to break through past politics when there's an opportunity to talk about you're experiencing these changes, your livelihoods are suffering, your crops are failing, like let's all get together and work on solutions. And I think things are so bad that there's an opportunity for some like really surprising and beautiful coalitions that we're starting to see, and that's really great. I'd love to hear your answer to that. What's like the...
I think as a kid who grew up very fortunately in California, and half of my childhood I spent in a 5,000 person horse and cattle ranching town in Central California on the coast playing in tide pools. Nature has always been the place where things make sense to me. And when I get in rooms full of people who don't believe that it's changing, or who don't think that it's a problem, or who suggest that this is just what the planet does, sure, you see swings in climate, but not like this, not with this rapidity, not with this level of damage. And to ignore the warning signs feels, I don't even have a word for it. It feels so crazy to me, and it frightens me that anyone could pretend that this is not an issue. And especially when you see the pretending happening in these upper echelons of power with all these, and look, I have great men in my life, and I have great old white guys in my life. My dad's an old white guy. Granny's from Canada, so that's probably why he's so awesome. But I see these old white guys in suits just on these bullet trains to disaster, drinking really expensive whiskey that they can afford because it gets sent to them by the fossil fuel guys as Christmas bonuses. And I'm like, hello? I have to live here with all these people when you're done. How do you not prioritize our future?
Also, if only we had bullet trains, that might be a big
I know, that would be so great.
We need better transit in America.
We do need better transit. I think to your point, we have so many of the solutions at hand, and that's what makes me hopeful, is knowing that they exist. And when I see, a 12-year-old girl in Europe holding court about climate change and
Greta Thunberg, if you don't know her, she's incredible.
I mean, she went viral. She's a young girl, and she just stood there and said the things that we need to be saying about defending our future generations. And so I'm excited, as sad as the rest of it makes me. I'm very excited by the young people who demand difference. I'm excited by the way that I see people having conversations differently, that I watch women holding the door open for one another. I was fortunate to speak on this thing in LA on Tuesday, and we were talking about creative content, and I said the thing I'm most excited about is that our generation, we're not buying what they're selling anymore, because they used to sell women are your enemy, there's only room for one of you in the room, and I was like, nah, if we're going to buy anything, we want to buy cute shoes, thank you Diane, we want to buy tickets to a music festival, we're buying into social experience, art, self-expression, we're not buying into women are our competition anymore, we buy collaboration and collaboration only, and that excites me.
Who are leading the climate protests. They are jumping on the bandwagon. They're saying that's a good idea. I want to do it too. Not like, oh, she already did it, or that's not cool. It's like, yes, and more of that. And so if anyone's interested in supporting these young women who are leading us away from the brink of climate catastrophe, they are having a strike all over the world next Friday, March 14th. There's a march basically in every city, so if you want to
what do we need to be following for all that information?
It's hashtag climate strike or school strike for climate.
We'll follow both. It's easy.
We'll find them and support the young folks.
Can I give you a task?
Please.
Can you tell us, think about how we can deal with those large companies like Monsanto, Bayer, whatever, whoever else is going to, and how do we deal with that to shift them? You don't have to answer now, but I'm here, you have my address.
Can you tell everyone what your social handle is?
It's Ayana, A-Y-A-N-A, Eliza. And I'll be sharing some more information about that event coming up. And the one thing that I would love you to look at is a group called Project Drawdown, and they're at drawdown.org. And they have the top 100 climate solutions that already exist listed on their website. These are all things we need to be supporting and helping to scale. So go to drawdown.org. They released a book. It's a New York Times bestseller a year or two ago. And the graphic design is actually really good, which I care about because I hate like ugly enviro stuff. So you can have your design and your planet too.
And so maybe between you and Drawdown, we can also put our heads together and think about some actual substantive calls to action.
We're doing a convening of women leading on climate this summer. And I would love for you to be there.
I'm there. Tell me where are we going?
We're going to a ranch in Montana.
Okay, great. I love that plan. I have to introduce you. One of my friends is a farmer in Montana.
Maybe we take this offline because we're getting the you
Okay.
have zero.
Sorry, we're just excited.
We're just going to hang out forever and save the planet, and you're with us, right?
So, answer Diane's question. We have further calls to action. Please follow Ayana. Let's all get on board with Drawdown, and we'll make some noise. We're good at that.